If you believe North Korea is the ultimate dictatorship, you're in for a surprise. Meet Eritrea, the tiny East African nation that takes dictatorship to a whole new level. They're dubbed the North Korea of Africa, and for good reason. This country, located in the Horn of Africa, is ruled by President Issaias Afeworki with an iron fist. There are no free markets and no trading partners. The debt to GDP ratio is sky high because this country is like the VIP section for in-debt gamblers. And let's be real, life in Eritrea is pretty rough. It's basically the most broke country in Africa. Eritrea officially became their own boss in May 1993, after breaking up with Ethiopia. Since then, the president has been calling the shots. He set up a one-party party without bothering with pesky things like elections, and anyone who tries to speak up gets shut down real quick. The political and economic agenda of the Eritrean administration remained unchanged in the wake of the 2018 peace accord with Ethiopia. It nevertheless maintained an authoritarian political structure, a command economy, and surveillance state functions. The People's Front for Democracy and Justice, PFDJ, in power at the time, and the armed forces continued to dominate the economy. Prominent military officials engaged in unlawful operations like the smuggling of products and the trafficking of Eritreans who wanted to flee the nation. On top of that, they participated in widespread and organised theft of supplies and equipment in Tigray. There were no recognised trade agreements with Ethiopia as of January 2023. Corrupt Sudanese and Eritrean authorities haven't stopped being involved in cross-border trafficking. There are a ton of problems. The lack of economic and political stability meant that many people were facing challenges in meeting their everyday needs. The fuel shortage had a significant impact on transportation and heating, making life more difficult for households. The scarcity of drinking water also poses health risks for the population, especially in areas with limited access to clean water sources. The frequent blackouts of electricity disrupted daily routines and caused inconvenience to businesses and households alike. Poverty is widely prevalent in Eritrea, which continues to rank among the entire globe's poorest nations. Due to a lack of data, Eritrea's nutritional status cannot be ranked. Additionally, UNICEF omitted information about the overall number of undernourished children. The government hid information regarding the nation's nutritional status, as is commonly done. An estimated 80% of the population makes a living through subsistence farming and pastoral operations, which are further complicated by the extended national service. COVID-19 limitations had ended, but there was still no public transportation available. Vaccinations were not made available to the general public. In metropolitan areas, there was a persistent shortage of essential everyday goods like electricity, cooking fuel, and drinking water. The government hasn't made any investments to ameliorate the situation, nor has it utilised politically driven monies obtained from Saudi Arabia and the UAE or income from mining activities. In the administrative areas they govern, military officers enforce their own rules. The civilian administrative machinery has no say in the matter. Leaders of the PFDJ and military still own their own stores. Because of the total lack of transparency regarding the government, statistical data is either inaccessible or inaccurate. The poverty rate, as well as rankings on the Gender Inequality and Gini Index, are not published. Eritrea was placed 174th out of 189 nations in the UNDP's Human Development Index. Even though its score on the HDI increased, it's still crazy low with a score of 0.49. This suggests a relatively low degree of economic and social development. The reason for this low level is the 20-year-old unlimited term national service program, which forces most adults to serve as recruits in exchange for pocket money. Because of this, there is a high percentage of poverty, and many Eritreans depend on their relatives living abroad for support in order to exist. That means there is a constant mass departure, since most people are fundamentally shut out of opportunities to make a good life. The majority of health facilities, colleges, and centres for vocational education are found in the capital and the southern region, which is primarily home to the Tigrinya ethnic group. Some are not allowed to attend school and are usually drafted at the age of 18 into the Sawa military training facility. They are then employed as forced workers in PFDJ and military-owned businesses, as well as in the administrative and civil service. Malnutrition is particularly common among ethnic minority groups since they are typically poorer and more vulnerable. In addition to that, because family members in industrialized nations provide little financial support, there is a high child death rate in such communities. And we aren't done. A small number of dishonest army officers and PFDJ members control the majority of the country's wealth, operating the command economy and participating in illicit operations like human trafficking in Tigray. It's believed that huge sums of money have been moved to bank accounts in China that are registered in the names of the president and his son. Gender inequality and indirect discrimination against citizens who are not associated with the dominant ethnic group keep going, especially in educational institutions. The framework for market organisation is terribly inadequate in Eritrea. It's almost impossible to launch a business, and the majority of privately held companies that are currently in operation have had to close due to severe cash flow constraints. Eritrea is ranked 185th out of 190 countries in the World Bank's 2021 Doing Business Index, which is dedicated to business startup information. The government adhering to a command economy, in which government operations take primacy over private enterprise, is the cause of this dark outcome. It isn't surprising that this authoritarian regime has the back of a super strong military. But before we go into it, if you like this video so far, please consider liking and subscribing to our channel. Because of its 30-year struggle for independence from Ethiopia, Eritrea has a long history of being a highly militarized country. A fundamental element of Eritrean nationalism and state creation, militarism is perhaps a product of conflict, but it's also linked to Eritrea's poor human rights record. After gaining independence in 1991, Eritrea was ready to liberalize and democratize. At that same time, the nation started a vigorous process of nation building, a major component of which was militarism. Today, Eritrea has 202,000 active military troops out of a population of slightly over 3.6 million, meaning that there are close to 56 active military soldiers for every 1,000 citizens. By contrast, there are 4.2 active military personnel for every 1,000 citizens in the US. When it comes to the overall number of active military troops, Eritrea ranks second out of 169 countries, despite its tiny size. Because of its laws requiring military service, Eritrea has a high military personnel to population ratio. All Eritrean nationals between the ages of 18 and 40 are required to serve in the military. This isn't new, it actually goes back to 1995 when Eritrea launched its national service program. Although there were always worries about difficult living and working conditions, Eritrea's national military service, which mandates 6 months of military training and 12 months of free military or civic duty for all Eritreans, originally received broad public support. This powerful military of Eritrea has made it possible for them to assist their Ethiopian neighbours. The Eritrean government has been actively assisting the Ethiopian government in the fight against the Tigray People's Liberation Front, TPLF, since the conflict began in November 2020. But how exactly is the relationship between Eritrea and Ethiopia? For more than 20 years, Eritreans have been pouring into Ethiopia via the border, escaping forced military service, torture, and prison in one of the most oppressive states in Africa. Approximately 20,000 of them were residing in 2 camps for refugees in the Tigray province of Ethiopia, seeking refuge in their wealthier neighbour. Soon after, Tigray saw a rebellion that pitted the local authorities against Ethiopia's national authority. In an effort to make amends and support its partner, Ethiopian President Abiy Ahmed, the Eritrean military sent troops and tanks. Days later, truckloads of Eritrean army soldiers landed at the Hitsats and Shimelba refugee camps. The government of Eritrea persisted in its fierce suppression of the population, enforcing limitations on the right to free speech and opinion, as well as obstructing impartial foreign monitoring. Eritrea persisted in having a detrimental effect on the environment for human rights in the Horn of Africa. Under the one-man dictatorship of President Issaias Afeworki, who was not elected, Eritrea lacked an independent court, an autonomous legislature, and free press outlets. Issaias shut down all free newspapers in 2001 and detained journalists. Since gaining independence in 1993, the nation did not ever hold elections, and the 1997 constitution, which limited executive power and guaranteed civil rights, was never actually put into effect by the government. It's actually among the least free countries in the whole world. As conflict restarted recently in Ethiopia's Tigray area, reports of widespread forced labour and conscription increased, but the government was unable to take any action to stop these practices. Reservists were reportedly called back in preparation for future combat alongside Ethiopian security forces in Tigray. Eritreans, primarily men and single women, were still being forced into low-paying military or civil service with no choice in their occupation or place of service by the government. Conscientious objection is penalised rather than accepted. Procedures aren't transparent at all, and national service termination is random. Without any other options, conscripts are frequently the victims of cruel treatment, including torture. If you think this is the worst it can get, wait and see. Systematic roundups and protracted unjustified detentions and arrests with no access to legal representation, review by the court, or family visits persisted, sometimes for a long time. The aim of this was to track down those believed to be the government's opponents. So many prisoners suffer in the nation's vast system of official and unofficial prisons, packed into tiny spaces with poor access to food, water, and medical attention. On top of that, Eritrea ranks second in modern slavery, with 9% of modern slaves in 2021. Things don't stop getting worse. There is no information available about vaccination campaigns in Eritrea, according to the African Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC. In late 2021, Eritrea was re-elected to the UN Human Rights Council on a non-competitive slate of African nations. This could have been a good step. Unfortunately, the UN Special Rapporteur on the state of human rights in Eritrea claims that this did not lead to changes in its restrictive policies. Eritrea also persisted in its inability to engage with important UN and African Union rights procedures, obstructing the UN Special Rapporteur's visit. Among other actions, it was against the Commission of Human Rights Experts on Ethiopia, ICHREE, being established in December 2021 to look into human rights violations by all sides involved in the Tigray conflict. It shouldn't be surprising to know that doing business in Eritrea is particularly challenging, as we mentioned before. On top of this crazy political environment, the inadequate infrastructure in Eritrea is another difficulty for businesses operating there. In certain places, there can be irregular access to water and electricity, and the transportation system is underdeveloped. Accessing necessary services and moving commodities may become challenging as a result. Now that you know how things go from bad to worse, it must be obvious that people there are fleeing the country. With a Human Development Index of 0.42, Eritrea ranks as one of the globe's 10 least developed nations, indicating its poverty. Because of this, Eritrea is primarily a country of origin, with people departing for social, political, educational, and economic reasons. Although most Eritrean migrants are between the ages of 18 and 40, regular migration from Eritrea is simpler for males over 54 and women over 47. But most people find immigration dangerous due to the lack of regular migration routes, particularly for the young Eritreans who must be conscripted. Almost 10% of Eritrea's population left the country recently. More than 780,000 went to Ethiopia, besides those who went to Sudan, Europe, and the United States. Traditional livelihoods are significantly impacted by national service and land confiscation, which also has an effect on minorities' capacity to exist in a context where climate change continues to pose a growing danger. Inadequate education, low income, and state-approved conscription all play a part in the population outflow from Eritrea. It's worthy to mention that the enrollment rate of schooling was 42% in 2015. No wonder. Inadequate education is one of the factors behind this crazy emigration. Also, the departure of young Eritreans because of conscription forces households to rely on foreign remittances, which promotes the never-ending cycle of emigration, remittance needs, and economic misery. That is, since remittances from outside help families sustain themselves, moving abroad is an answer to economic distress. You know the problem is really big when skilled migrants, which are supposed to drive advances in the country, are also moving abroad. The main factors associated with skilled emigration from Eritrea are stagnant economic conditions and notably poor wages, as indicated by the fact that 96% of ministerial staff members sent overseas for extended periods of training between 1993 and 2002 never returned. The economic issues are estimated to be the driving force behind 20% of Eritrean immigrants. Another factor driving immigration is a lack of social services. Eritreans have complained for years about their lack of access to services, poor infrastructure, corruption, and inadequate educational opportunities. In a nutshell, the harsh regime in Eritrea has produced a society that resembles one that is at war. Eritrea had suffered greatly during the previous 27 years due to both violent dictatorships and war, both of which had severe socio-economic, political, and psychological effects. The nation hasn't experienced a full-blown conflict since the Ethiopian-Eritrean border war, does display many of the hallmarks of a society at war, such as forced migration, a sharp decline in the labour force, social unrest, economic instability, social trauma, the breakdown of social systems, an overall drop in education, and the breakdown of institutions and communities. Normal life won't be able to return to the nation until things have been put into place. From there, by addressing its extensive institutional limitations, Eritrea may strive for effective state building, restoring peace, governance, development, stability, and security. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons to receive more content. See you in the next video.